All right, dating part two. So I was happy the first video turned out pretty well, and a lot of people liked the reflections that I shared with my own dating experience and how when we make the attempt to look for partners, really we don't even see the partners or the people that we're trying to pursue. And the reality is that we're battling these images inside ourselves. Now, there's something that struck me the other day. I was just scrolling through Instagram and a girl posted something that I found rather intriguing. She said that the quote in the post said, "If I exploit you for your actions, don't get mad at me. It's the image that you have of me. But it's not my problem to address it." Something along those lines. And I found that intriguing because in some sense the post was correct. And then in some sense it completely deferred the willingness to work with, right? And I found that a little troublesome about the willingness to work with. And it seemed that this was the kind of standard that she was willing to uphold against and use in either her relationships or the dating life. And there's two themes that I really want to talk about, and one of them is the idea of standards and this common notion of wasting time, specifically in the dating realm. You could say this is the wasting time part is also applicable to our daily life and growing up, this fear of not wasting time. And in some sense, I don't even know what that means when we really look at it, especially in the dating realm, and this is something that I really want to talk about because I've encountered people that are very afraid of wasting time. Typically these people have gone through something traumatic in terms of a relationship that they wanted it to work and it didn't work out, and they feel that their time is literally on the line, right? They're getting older, they haven't found someone now, they're dipping their feet into the dating world, and they're starting to realize it feels like a bunch of games and a bunch of lies and false impressions. And in some sense, I mean, we're not entirely wrong here for those assumptions. You know, it goes back to this idea of we're all constructing some sort of image and then looking for people to comport themselves into the image that we've created for them. And so in some sense we're not wrong, but there is a paradox here about wasting time. And I'm constantly reminded by Slavoj Zizek's quote that I love so much about radical love is one. And I'm kind of summarizing that line there. Or having this radical love is actually just one. And I was thinking, if we were to apply that concept, that idea of a radical love being one, then the concept of wasting time doesn't really exist, does it? So then what are we looking for? What are we afraid of in this idea of wasting time in the dating realm or in relationships, right? This can also apply to relationships, I believe. And I started thinking about this because standards and the idea of wasting time are definitely intimately connected, right? I would say you start thinking that you're wasting time when you have a certain set of standards that you are withholding. Now, I'm not a psychoanalyst, but some of the things I've been learning while reading Freud and Jung and diving into a little bit of Lacan, that from hearsay, you could say. So it's probably not dependable because I haven't actually looked at the material myself, but I do trust the people that are rather very enthusiastic about Lacan. And I start to see that when we look at psychoanalysis, it really makes you question, well, not question, but it really makes you, in some sense, wonder, do people really know what they want? Do people really know what they need? And because ironically, we create standards assuming that we know so, that we know what we want, that we know what we need. And then the concept of wasting time rolls in out of just a secondary effect where, let's say, a woman is looking for a man of value, right? Value is a very ambiguous term. And that's also a problem, I think, is that the dating realm, ironically, we talk about a lot of things like, well, I'm just trying to find somebody that's worth my time. Again, that's very ambiguous. What do we mean by that? Worth my time? And this would imply, in some sense, my value. But again, what do we mean by my value? Because there is some kind of implication or an implicit standard being evoked here. And it's very ambiguous and general. And I've noticed that the more I prod into people's idea, it really starts to reveal that they don't really know what they want. The only thing they do know, you could argue, is that they just don't want what they had previously. And there is some danger in that as well, because how did they interpret what they didn't want in that previous relationship? If we assume that their interpretation is correct, then perhaps they are making a better move in terms of going the opposite manner. But if they made an incorrect interpretation of that previous relationship, then perhaps they don't even know that they're still going in the wrong direction, right? It could have been that they needed to rework a certain framework of perspective And that's why it didn't work. But because they never changed their perspective, they assume that it's the other person. And then they continue on trying to find the opposite of those people. But the thing is, they never change their perspective. And so we don't actually really know if this is an adequate thing going on. The only thing you could say is that, well, they're actually just not finding anybody. It's very difficult. And so they start blaming the world in some sense. They start saying, well, all men are liars, or all men just want certain these things. They start generalizing. Men do the same thing too. No worries. No worries here. Men will generalize as well. And we're not really paying attention to the framework of thinking and perspective that we're approaching this. And there is some danger in that. And what I'm trying to exploit here again is that I'm not really sure, and I'm almost certainly positive to some degree, or confident, that we don't actually know what we want. And the things that we do know that we want, they're very ambiguous and they're very general. Right? I just want a good person. I want him to be funny. I want him to be smart. This is all ambiguous. Smart in what? Smart in what way? Good in what way? Good in this. These are important questions to kind of prod further. And I had exposed the commonality problem, and I think the commonality problem also is a big error in the terms of these creations of standards that we put in some kind of criteria. Now, granted, it's very hard not to have a kind of criteria, but something that I want to provoke is actually that we should attempt to refrain from having judgment. We should have some tension with our own judgment. That's what I am provoking in here. Is that we should. And we should be skeptical about our judgment, because there's a lot of paradoxes in how we decide to pursue dating. And when we create a standard, we assume we know what we want. And the problem is, when we make that, we narrow the pool, we narrow the dating pool. And when we narrow the dating pool, we pose the risk of actually never finding anybody. Because again, we assume that we know what we want, and then it becomes very difficult. And a lot of people get either depressed or rather very negative, you could say, angry. Why do people act like this? Why do people have these intentions? I just want to find a person that's good and makes me laugh and that's attractive, and right? And you see these standards, they're again very ambiguous. Now we could say beauty is something that we don't really possess, but it would come in and you would see people get captivated by it. But it's very important that we realize that we need to question our standards. If something isn't working, I think the first thing shouldn't be to blame the dating pool, but to actually question our standards and question what we want and question what we actually desire. And I know for myself, it's been really difficult, actually. It's been really difficult because I constantly am fighting myself, fighting my own judgment, fighting my own. And you will begin to see, this is what's interesting, is you'll begin to see a kind of repulsiveness when you start fighting your own judgments and your own desires that you think you know. That's what you want. But when you actually start talking to people and refraining from applying your standards and refraining from looking for some type of value, right? You can leave yourself to be very surprised. And you learn new things and aspects that you never had anticipated in the dating realm, right? And the reason why I want to talk about wasting time is that the paradox of this, what I was trying to exploit in this idea was that people that are so determined to not waste time paradoxically waste their own time. Because when you narrow something down that you think you know you want and that you think you know you desire, you isolate everything else. You narrow something down. And when you do that, paradoxically, you do waste your time. And you do see only people that are players and liars and everything else. We do have to pay attention to what we are wanting and be rather skeptical about that. And that's really hard. That is really hard because the world that we live in never questions what we desire. It's always thrusted right in front of us. Of course you want this new car. Of course you want the new best thing. Of course you want this. It's common sense. And I think that is some of the dangers in holding some kind of standard, because overall, when I talk to people about what they want in a person, in a human being, it's always some of the same things. But it's so general, and I would say most people have very general standards, right? But they don't realize that some of those general standards can be debilitating because they haven't really broken down what it means when we say that we want. You know, I've heard a lot of women say this. I want a man of value. I don't know what that means. Now, to be fair, some women have specified, and they said that they want a man that makes a lot of money. Now, that's interesting because then the value is conditional on the man making money. And so I guess the next question should ask, when you say that you want a man of value, do you want a man of value that is unconditional, or do you want a man of value that is conditional? Right? And in some cases, I've heard very interesting conversations about this where typically the man that has a lot of money and that you deem as valuable, he's not really concerned with an attractive woman because he can always find many of attractive women that want the same thing. And the paradox of this woman wanting a man that makes a lot of money and she's hoping that she can get in based on her beauty is that, ironically, the man is a very high percentile, right? He's probably like 1%, 2%, 10%. And she's going for a very specific type of man. But that man, in his placement, he can pick any woman that he wants. And you're assuming that he's going to pick you. And that's one of the examples of what I mean by the standards of, when you have a standard, we have to be very careful that when we narrow something down, a lot of these people talk about, I don't want to waste my time, I have standards. But the thing is, ironically, you do waste your time. And ironically, we isolate ourselves from something, but then we sort of exteriorly blame the world for just having poor dating pools. But the one thing we never question, the one thing that goes most often unquestioned, and this is what I've been trying to stress the whole time, is, do we really know what we want? And do we really know what we desire? And how can we really be confident in the standards that we create? And how can we really be confident in this idealization of what we call value? Who is the authority of what we determine to be valuable? The only way to know is to simply have a conversation, to be a witness, rather than holding a judgment before one is able to have a conversation. All right, that's enough for today. All right, guys, take care.